1. Ghosts seem to follow me everywhere, so I'm not going to bore you with every single event that happened. I will tell you a couple that really stand out. First, the ghost that our dog saw. I say ghost because I'm fairly certain there was no other trigger for this. Me and my mum were watching a movie, no one else in the house. Our dog was curled up on the sofa next to us. Out of nowhere, the dog jumps up and runs to the bottom of the stairs, looking up. His hackles were standing on end, and he was barking viciously at something at the top of the stairs. There was nothing there, but he was transfixed. Even when we went to investigate, he didn't follow. Moving on to a new house, well, a new old house. It was an old railway cottage, plenty of history. One night I was sitting in my bedroom just editing videos. The door was open, my desk was right by the door, and I could see out into the hallway. I heard, plain as anything, footsteps coming up the last few stairs and towards my open door. Nobody was there. Surprisingly, it didn't scare me all that much. I decided later to go and explore a nearby graveyard. It was an old graveyard with so many sad stories. I researched a lot of people buried there and went to visit their graves. One that stuck out to me was a soldier. He died of influenza the day the war ended. I hope he at least survived long enough to hear we won. Anyway, I went around this graveyard with a camera. When I stopped by his grave, on the video, you can hear a husky male voice say, "Hey." In the same graveyard, I decided, just for a bit of fun, to try a free iPhone ghost detector app. Sure, I thought it was a load of crap. It's one of those which spouts out random words. This time I had my mum with me, who stopped at a child's grave. I think she was 12, very young. My mum wiped leaves and other gunk off the surface of the stone. The app came out with "dirty." We thought it was a bit of a cool coincidence. Until I got home and reviewed the footage, you can hear a child say, "Dad," just after the app says it. Not long after, I went to another graveyard where my nan's ashes are interred. I knew I was going to be moving hundreds of miles away soon, and I wasn't sure when I'd visit her again. So I spoke to her, asked her to keep my granddad safe. When I turned to leave, I saw an odd mist hanging in the air, not far away. I liked to think it was her, just reassuring me that she'd be there to keep my granddad out of trouble. Later on, I moved in with my brother to make a life for myself in Scotland. I was staying in his spare room. This is another very old building. It used to belong to the guy who built the business I now work for. I was lying awake at around 3 a.m. watching Netflix when I heard a knock on the window, like the standard knock when you're calling at someone's door. It scared the absolute hell out of me. I checked and there was nothing that could have blown against the window. I never told my brother. The last is born from my own stupidity. I'm in Scotland with a new life and with my pooch. Not the same one from earlier. He is with my parents. I have a collie. There was a lovely walk we could take down from my flat, through the town centre to the seafront. On the way was an old graveyard. I walked through it a couple of times at night. It was peaceful. But this one night I got to the gates and I had the strongest feeling of dread, just a sudden fear inside me. It was nothing to do with going to a graveyard at night. I'd done it before. This time something felt very, very wrong. I just turned around and never went back to that place. It's probably a good thing. Who knows who was in that graveyard? That's pretty much it. The craziest things that have ever happened. I'm sure there will be more. I'm a sucker for the paranormal. I'm sure there's a ghost at my workplace, so I'm keen to see something there. 2. When I was younger, I shared a room with my older sister. Our mom is Christian and our dad was a Catholic. So we grew up with Bibles and crosses and even went to church as kids. Personally, I never felt comfortable and didn't fully believe in God, so I was more agnostic at the time. I'm now Wiccan. Because of that, my mom was worried I was going to go to hell for not believing, and so on and so forth. You get the deal. Anyway, my family is generally very spiritual on both sides, mostly due to our native roots, and so we often draw a lot of energy in naturally, both good and bad. Unfortunately for me, the bad ones seem to stick the most. We have many strange and scary experiences, but also some really nice ones as well. But I myself have a lot of scary ones. My sister and I both slept in the scariest room in the house, because it had the most and worst activity. We would see shadows, hear voices, see things, and they would often mess with us and even threw things at times. Our attic door is directly above the room too, and would open by itself, which was terrifying, because it's one of those heavy-ish doors you have to really push up and move to the side to open. And whenever it did, bad things would happen in the house. Moving on, one day, my mom gave me a cross, and at first I thought it was pretty, but felt kinda off. I didn't want to make her feel bad, so I ignored my feelings and hung it above my closet, where the sun would shine on it. That's when I started getting really bad feelings, and the activity in my room got even worse. I'd even been dragged off my bed like in horror movies, and woke up with bruises and scratches on me that would suddenly disappear. Things mostly just happened to me, though. So my sister just ignored it like it was no big deal, as I got the sharp end of the stick. Eventually, I threw the cross away in our dumpster and called it good. Unfortunately, not long after, it reappeared in our room while we were cleaning, and whenever I threw it away, kept reappearing, sometimes even in the living room. Eventually, I freaked out and broke it into pieces and shoved it into the dumpster, basically dumpster diving. Luckily, I haven't seen it since. Eventually, my sister moved and I had the room to myself. Unfortunately, she had left her own cross. That also gave me creepy vibes. After experiencing a few more things that took place after I had discovered it, I decided to throw that one away as well. I thought things would be perfectly fine and went on with my life. Activity went down in my room, but spiked usually when my family fought though, so the usual, and I would never see it again. Or so I thought. That leads us to today. I was just chillin', watering my plants, planting onions, and clearing away the dead leaves of my beloved lilies. I'm trying to grow my own garden, when all of a sudden, I look down next to them and see none other than an old tattered cross that just so freaking happens to be my sister's, and I know I threw away about a decade freaking later. It's just chillin' next to my lilies. What the frick? I'm currently freaking out, but still trying to build up the courage to pick it up and throw it out all over again. But I'm getting weird vibes again, and I don't know what I should do. So please, if anyone has any ideas on what to do with it, let me know. I would love to get rid of this thing ASAP. 3. Long ago, I lived with my family in a government quarters, behind the hospital in a town just south of Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. Being the restless teenager, I cycled everywhere every time I could leave the house. Sometimes I would go into the hospital compound to visit a small coffee shop, which sold my favorite sweets. I would also get a drink and enjoy it there to replenish my energy before more cycling. Beside the shop stood a small shrine dedicated to one of the Hindu deities, Ganesh with the elephant head. At the time, the shrine looked new. I was there buying some sweets when they had a puja, consecration ceremony, for the newly installed statue of the deity. That was when I learned that the shop's owner's son was the one who built the shrine. He was an orderly at the hospital, a pleasant-looking man whom I sometimes saw there helping out at the shop. One day I heard a man ask the son why he built the shrine. This is the son's story, which I will tell from his perspective. This may not be as accurate because it has been decades and I'm translating from a mix of Tamil, Malay, and English. The son's story. A year ago I was working late, so I came to help my father close up for the night. After my father left for home, I stayed behind to finish up some paperwork. It was almost midnight when I locked up and started to walk down the walkway past the morgue to the exit. In front of the morgue, I came across a young man who was crying inconsolably. This was not unusual at the hospital. I asked the man if he was okay and if he needed some help. The man turned to me and said, "They must hate me, Ane." Ane is Tamil for big brother, and also a term of respect that we, regardless of race, use to address an older Indian man. Why do you say that, Tomby? Tomby means younger brother, also a term of endearment. I've been here since last night, and no one has come for me, said the young man, who I think must have been Malay or Chinese. Don't be like that, Tomby. Maybe they are on their way. I'm sure they'll be here tomorrow. Trust me. That seemed to calm the man down a little. Thank you, Anne, he said, as he lifted his head and smiled at me. I'll never forget that face and the smile. I don't know why. So I left him and went home. He waved, I waved back. The next day a family came to claim their son's remains. They came from clear across the country, and back then the roads were not as good as they are today, so it took them a while to get here. They told us that their son, who was studying at a university nearby, had been involved in a road collision and had died. When they received the news, they were at their farm, which was far in the interior, that made their journey take longer. The medical officer instructed me to check the identity of the remains in the morgue. I took a member of the family with me, and we headed to the morgue. When I pulled away the shroud to reveal the face of the body, it struck me that this was a young man whom I had spoken to the night before. Half of his face was gone, but I could still recognize him. His father verified that this was indeed his son, and then he cried. I let him out to where his family was waiting. Then I left them and came back to the morgue to finish up my job. You don't need to be sad, Tomby. Your family is here. They love you very much. I'll get you ready, and then you can go home, Tomby, I said to the body. I looked away from the face to check the tag against the paperwork on my clipboard. When I saw the face again, I was about to cover it with the shroud. I could have sworn that he smiled just a little. The next day I asked for permission to build this shrine, so that perhaps the spirits from the morgue will not wander around this place at night. This was years ago. The shop, the shrine, the morgue, and a couple of the buildings nearby are gone now. In their place now stand multi-story buildings. In one of the buildings, not far from where the old morgue was, you'll find the new morgue. 4. This happened in Myanmar, year 2005. I was in my early teens and on the way back home from a family vacation somewhere in eastern Myanmar. They didn't have modern motorways like they do now, so the highway we took was built along villages and farms and so on, and you could stop anywhere you like. People who are involved are me, my parents, my aunt and cousin, my older sister, and our driver. Anyway, we were driving home in that old highway overnight, and around 3 a.m. our driver got unusually sleepy. This was strange because he was sleeping all day prior to the drive, and used to night driving throughout this trip. So my father took over, and he got really sleepy within minutes as well. I was up while everyone was asleep because I really needed to use the bathroom, so I knew what was happening. My dad decided to stop the car near a shelter called Zayat in Burmese. You could find those pretty much everywhere in the villages, and they serve various purposes. There were 2 huge benches in there, big enough for one to lay down. I cannot remember the exact location, but it was somewhere remote near Naypyidaw, the current capital that wasn't built then. Firstly, the driver went outside the car to rest on the bench, and then I went out. My sister followed me, and also my dad. There wasn't any light except from our torches, and there were no other cars on the road, so we didn't see what was around. Anyway, Dad, me, and my sister were resting on the other bench, and suddenly we all fell asleep like out of nowhere, as we didn't even do our business. And then Sister and I woke up, because we thought someone had woke us up. And I looked at my watch, and it was 3:30 a.m., so we weren't asleep for long. Everyone was still asleep, so I woke the other 2 up, as I didn't feel right about something. We quickly went back inside the car and locked the doors and fell asleep right away again. I had a nightmare which felt very real. I saw a Burmese mythology monster called Blue, a shapeshifter, knocking on my window trying to get inside to get us, as that was the village of death. She was laughing creepily and knocking all around to let her in, and it felt like hours of hell. I woke up screaming, so did the other 3 who went outside the car. I looked at my watch and it was 5 a.m. It was then bright enough to see where we were. That place was filled with ruins of pagodas and old cemeteries. Dad and the driver quickly came inside and we drove off right away. My mom asked us what was going on and I told her about my dream. And my sister was like, "Oh my god, you too?" She had the same sort of dream, but she saw a bunch of people carrying a dead body. And she asked them where she was and they said it was the village of death. And laughed at her creepily and they tried to get her, so she ran away. My dad and the driver had the same sort of dreams about the village of death as well, but with different types of monsters or ghosts in it. We realized that shelter we went was a place where they did a funeral or prayers for the dead before they were buried and cremated. After a minute or so of driving, we saw a recent crash site, broken landmark flowers, so it made us even more freaked out. Strange thing was my mum, cousin, and my aunt didn't have any dreams, so only those who went outside had those creepy dreams, and our dreams were connected and felt really real. The excessive sleepiness was also very strange, as we weren't that tired to be knocked out instantly. Anyway, they were just dreams, but the whole area and connected dreams gave a creepy vibe, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. 5. So to get right into it, at age 4 my family moved out of New York City into a suburban area of Connecticut. The house we moved into was a spectacular colonial-style white shingle mansion that I was told was built in the 1930s. I lived there for 10 years before moving into a polar opposite modern house on the other side of town built in 2012, where we were the first to live there. So I will be separating this into each of the houses. First house. This house was very spacious and traditional. Old, intricate carpets and oriental fancy rooms my parents never let me go in. Not to come off as bragging, but we quickly found an excess of rooms, so around the age of 6, or after 2 years, I moved out of the room I shared with my brother into a large room that was supposed to be a game room of sorts. It could fit 3, and I remember always hating how big it was. My bed was on one side of the room with the door. I always had my back turned to the rest of it, as at night you could hardly even see the other side, like staring down a dark hallway. Even before knowing what ghosts really were, I got bad vibes from my room. I had unexplainable dreams that I documented and wrote down, vivid dreams that I can share in another post if needed, but just a weird combination of scary and confusing. These dreams started only when I moved into that room. I woke up in the middle of the night to feelings of being pulled, in which I always ran to my parents' room, also a large room I was afraid of, to sleep with them in fear. Now, no one else in my family ever experienced the stuff I did, leading me to believe that whatever the hell was haunting me was, well, haunting me alone. I heard my name being called before falling asleep, only to being completely alone, waking up to loud crashes that sounded right next to me, and even sleep paralysis at that young of an age. The only other rooms I hated more than my own were my parents' room and the guest bedroom. In my parents' room, I always felt uneasy in it, as a lot of my scary dreams took place in it, like a déjà vu dream of me waking up in an endless loop there. Now one time, for whatever reason when I was 9 or 10, I felt the uncontrollable need to go in there. My body kind of walked itself. I went into their large bathroom and washed my hands. As I looked in the mirror, this strange, out-of-tune, harp-sounding horror movie effect played out of nowhere as in the mirror I saw a noose and felt it brush against my neck as it swung. I told my parents, and they had no explanation other than my imagination was running wild. As for the guest bedroom, it was all black and white, bed, carpet, furniture, blinds, even walls. This room was deliberately the worst, and although I never experienced anything in it, I couldn't look in the doorway without a rush of fear. New house. This is an elaboration of the guest bedroom, maybe because my parents had the great idea to move all the furniture, the bed, and even the ugly curtains into the new house's guest room across from my bedroom. I still keep the door closed. and come back to it opened, even though my mom and anyone else claims not to have opened it, due to just getting negative vibes from the room. I can't even stand in there without getting nauseous. I had one dream, where it was just the room but different. There were old black and white family photos everywhere. This night I slept in my room with my dog, a small 14-pound Havanese. As the camera lens in my dream zoomed in on this little girl's portrait, I wake up to a whoosh and thud, only to see my dog on the other side of my freaking bedroom. Now this happened recently when I was 18. I grab my dog and run to my parents' new and completely fine room to tell them what happened. In denial, they dismiss it, and say he probably jumped off, but if he did, he wouldn't have yelped as it happened. So that's my paranormal haunting story. Since moving houses, activity has died down a lot more. Still some weird stuff. I swear a great evil was in that old house. And the old house problems that made it hard to sell were no coincidence. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 163. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Getting this one done a little bit earlier than usual because this is glitch week. And if all goes well, I haven't sent emails yet, but if all goes well, you would have had a glitch video yesterday. And you should have another one. Well, I'll talk about that. I'll probably already have spoken about that in the outro. About the schedule over the holiday period. Because we're in November now. Let's see. Yep, 1st of November today. Well, when this goes up, it'll be the 1st of November. You should have had 2 uploads yesterday, so hopefully that all went okay. We'll see. And that means I got to start thinking about getting ready channel-wise for Christmas, just to make sure the content is available on Christmas. I've already done a couple of dry runs, so I'll be able to hopefully have the week off during Christmas week, but the content should remain, and as happens when I take a week off, will be a video every day, but not necessarily what you'd normally get on that particular day. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.